Hi, today we've got a lot of books to talk about because we're going to be going through my top 24 books of 2024. We've come to the end of another year and this has been a particularly brilliant reading year. This might have actually been my favourite year of my life in terms of reading. There are some incredible books that I'm about to share with you today and I'm so grateful that I've been able to read them. So let's jump straight into the video because there are so many books that I want to share with you. Overall, I read around 35 books in 2024, so it's not too bad. I'm trying to up my reading goal for 2025, so hopefully I'll have even more books that I can share with you next year. And even the one that's in 24th spot, I still really enjoyed. So all of these books are incredible. However, at the end of the video, I will share with you a few books that I didn't like as well and that I wouldn't recommend. So let's get cracking. Give this a thumbs up if you enjoy it and let me know what your top books are of 2024 as well. I hope you enjoy. In at number 24, we have The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I had a great time reading this. And like I said, even though it's spot 24th, this is not a bad book. I actually did a buddy read with one of my best friends when doing this, which made it so much more fun because we were trying to guess the plot. We were trying to see how predictable the book was going to be and if we could guess the ending or not, which kind of did, kind of didn't. There were some parts that I definitely didn't guess and there were others that we kind of did. This is a very funny book. The writing style is kind of basic, kind of simple. It's not a very descriptive author, but that's fine because if you prefer things to be a little more stripped back, then you will like this writing style. It's very fast paced, chapters are really short, some of the chapters are half a page long. It's got some really likeable characters in it. It's got that mystery element of trying to work out who the murderer is, but it's just so funny. It's not a serious book. And I will be reading more Richard Osman books and I'm happy I read this because it was a fun old time. In at spot 23, this one may be a bit controversial, I'm very sorry. This is A Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin, part of the A Song of Ice and Fire series. Now, I built my booktube channel off of A Song of Ice and Fire. The first book-related video that I did was a whole review for the A Song of Ice and Fire book series. Since then, I've done many A Song of Ice and Fire book-related videos. And I'm currently watching Game of Thrones, the TV show as well, and I'm reacting to that on my channel if you're interested. Shameless plug. But in at number 23 is part of the A Song of Ice and Fire series. Now this is my least favourite out of the books in the core collection. And I think it's purely because this book has split the characters in half. So you go through the whole series, getting used to the characters, really enjoying them. And then when you get to A Feast for Crows, half of the characters are no longer in it, because they're in A Dance with Dragons Part 1 instead. And I think that the reason why this was my least favourite A Song of Ice and Fire book was purely because my favourite characters and the storylines that I was the most invested in were not in this book. And it's a big old book. So I just wasn't as excited to pick it up as the rest in the series. However, still a brilliant book because George R.R. Martin is a brilliant author. I really enjoyed my time reading this. I'm so excited to reread it. It's actually the one that I am the most excited to reread because I think there's so many things that I'll have missed first time through. So that's spot 23. In at 22, we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I have read this book many times. I tend to always read it around Halloween, October time, because it's a pretty quick book to get through. I enjoy this book. Every time I read it, it's a great one. It's a horror, a thriller. However, it's also deeply saddening. I feel clinically depressed after I've read this book every single time without fail. It's just got some deep themes. And as always, I had a really fun time reading it. It's got brilliant reread potential. Next up in spot 21, we have Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. I think this was either the first or the second book that I read in 2024, so it's been almost a year since I read it. This is Twilight, but from Edward's perspective, which, I'm not being funny, but I actually preferred. I love delving into Edward's thoughts. He sees the world in such an articulate, intelligent way that I can't put my finger on it, but I'm dumb AF and he's just not. So reading from his perspective was enlightening. The only thing about this book and the reason why I didn't place it higher up on my list is just because it is slow and it's so detailed. I love a detailed author. This is detailed. It's also a very chunky book, but I absolutely loved it. It is the same story as Twilight, so nothing is gonna shock you. Everything that you expect to happen is going to happen. If you've read Twilight, the same events are taking place. It's just told through a different perspective. And I really like that the author can tell the same story, but it comes across different. So for that reason, 2024 started off to be a great reading year because I really enjoyed my time reading this. It's a great book. I would recommend it. It's just a little bit slow. In at spot 20, now this book, I don't have the physical copy with me and I've got no idea where it is. I've completely lost it. So that's fun. But this is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This was a Christmas gift from one of my best friends last year, so I read this pretty early on in 2024 as well. I think I read it in January. This is the ultimate cozy book. It's so light-hearted. I'm pretty sure she's an orc, the main character. She's kind of retired from that warrior lifestyle and she goes into a little village to open up a coffee shop. And that is it. If you like Dungeons and Dragons, you'll love this book. There's a lot of different species, there's lots of different fantasy elements in there. It's not heavy on the world building at all, it is very basic, but it's just such a cozy book and it's very quick to get through. I would describe this book as the perfect palate cleanser. So say you've just read a really heavy book, a really deep book, and you just want something very light and easy to cleanse your palate before you move on to your next deep book. Legends and Lattes, I would 100% recommend it for that. I flew through it. It's not a big book. It's so quick to read. The writing style is very, very easy to follow. And I would be interested to read the next one that Travis Baldree has released, which I think is called Bookshops and Bone Dust. So yeah, a great book and I would recommend it. So easy, so lighthearted, really cozy. In at number 19, we have a book that has been talked about everywhere over Book Talk. This is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. So although this is in at spot number 19, it's not particularly high up on my list. I am absolutely loving this book series at the moment. I'm about 4 books of the way in and it's one of my favourite series that I have started in 2024. There is just something about the way that Sarah J. Maas describes things. I always describe her writing style as beautiful. It's just so beautiful to read. The way that she describes environments, the characters that she builds, the world that she creates. I am so far loving Throne of Glass more than the ACOTAR series, and I did love ACOTAR. So this is a recommendation from Book Talk that I do believe is worth the hype. Throne of Glass, however, is probably the weakest so far. I wouldn't even say it's weak. The premise of it is that you're following an assassin and that's basically it. But she is so likeable. I've not really reached much romantasy yet. So far this is just fantasy for me. I don't know whether or not that'll change, but like I said, I'm 4 books in and it's much more fantasy than it is romantasy, which I am really enjoying. Goodness, are we speeding through these or not? I can't tell if I'm going fast or slow. I'm trying not to ramble because there's a lot of books here. Next up at spot number 18, we have The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I'm a little bit disappointed that I haven't read more Beth O'Leary in 2024 because she's got so many books that I'm so interested in. This was the first book I'd ever read by her. I will be reading more. I love her writing style, and the thing about this book is that it would make a perfect movie. It's so funny. It's about a woman and her grandmother who swap houses. So the grandmother starts to live in this big city lifestyle and the woman starts to live in this cozy, slow village lifestyle. I absolutely loved this book. It was so quick and easy to get through, really easy to follow. I love the writing style and I'm excited to read more from Beth O'Leary as well in 2025. Next up in spot number 17, we have a book that was highly recommended by a few of you in the comments on my videos, so thank you very much for doing that. This is Salem's Lot by Stephen King. My first Stephen King novel that I'd ever read and definitely not my last. It was a strong one. I really, really enjoyed my time reading this. Again, I think I read it around October time, maybe September. It was the perfect spooky book. This is about a village that is being taken over by vampires, basically. And I loved it. The only thing, and I did speak about this in my review that I uploaded onto my channel of this book, was that sometimes there was a lot of unnecessary information and I feel like the book could have been shorter. It is quite a big book. It's not like massive, but it is quite long. Don't know if that's a contradictory statement or not. But I just felt like there was a lot of irrelevant information that I didn't particularly care about. And also, this book has the most unlikable characters ever. There's probably like at least 50 characters in this book, and only one of them I liked. Every single other one was a horrible person, to say the least. And I don't particularly like reading books where I don't enjoy like any of the characters. So that's the only thing that let it down for me. But I still really enjoyed it. I had a great time reading it, and really happy that I've started reading Stephen King in 2024. In at number 16, we have another book that I don't currently have because I've lent it to my mum, but this is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. This was a reread, so I started reading it in 2023 and I read it for the second time in 2024. The perfect September-October book. It is all based around autumn. If you like those kind of Hallmark rom-com vibes, this is perfect. There's also a bit of spice sprinkled in there, but it's not too much. It doesn't take away from the plot, which I really like. This series is quite slated, and I'm not gonna lie, the second book in the series, which I will talk about later, I detested with a passion. But The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, there's just something about it that I do quite like, and I find it really cozy. So basic, so easy to read. The writing style is nothing to write home about. It's not gonna change your life. It's not brilliant, but there's just something about it that I like. Like, it's like a magnet. It keeps pulling me back to it. And I think it's because I do read it around that time of year, and it helps me just feel really autumnal, and I love to read seasonally. So books that are appropriate for that season, and I would recommend The Pumpkin Spice Cafe for that. I would not recommend the second one, but we'll talk about that at the end of the video. Spoiler alert, one of my least favourite books of 2024. In at number 15, we have Assassin's Blade by Sarah J Maas. This is the prequel to the Throne of Glass series that I mentioned earlier. I did read this first. And if you're thinking about whether or not to read the Throne of Glass series, I would recommend reading this first. I think it was great. I think if I hadn't read the prequel first, I might have been a bit confused when I went into Throne of Glass. People say this book is slow. I would say it is. There is action that happens, but it's basically crammed into the end of the book. But in terms of the world building and learning about the main character, Selena, it is just so vital. It made me feel so connected to her. There's also a very, very traumatic event that happens to Selena in this book, which has a massive impact on her story in Throne of Glass and the books after that. And I would say that if you have not read this book first, before the first one in Throne of Glass, it just wouldn't hit the same because you wouldn't know what had happened. I really loved this. It was such a strong start to the series for me. And again, like I said, Sarah J Maas has a beautiful writing style, which makes it all the more enjoyable. In at number 14, we have A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Now this is the other one where I can't remember if I read this first or second in 2024. It was either this or Midnight Sun that was first, and whichever one wasn't was second, if that makes sense. I've heard mixed things about this book. I don't know why, because I loved it. It was so emotional. It's just so deep. I've loved the Hunger Games series. I must admit, I haven't read them in a while, but I have read the whole series through at least twice. This book was just incredible. It was so emotional, and it hit me hard. I ate this book up. I have not watched the movie yet, which came out in 2024, I think. I really want to. I don't know what stopped me, probably just pure procrastination. I don't really watch movies because every time I'm watching a movie, I think I should be reading instead. And out of the two, I would always prefer to read rather than watch movies or TV. But I just absolutely loved this book so much. I can't even explain to you what the plot is. So this is like a prequel that's set before the Hunger Games series. Boy oh boy, I just loved it. Next up in number 13, we have A Court of Frost and Starlight by Sarah J Maas. Sarah J Maas is dominating this top 24 list. Again, I've heard a lot of mixed things online about this. A lot of people say that this is a pointless book. I must admit, it is a novella, so it is a novella that's sandwiched in the middle of the A Court of Thorn and Roses series. So if you're expecting lots of stuff to happen in this book, you would be wrong. Don't expect that. It's tiny. The thing I loved the most about this, although I read it in like the spring or the summer, this gives such cozy winter vibes. It almost feels like you're in like an ice kingdom when you're reading this. It's just so snowy and frosty and ultimate winter coziness. I absolutely adore the characters in the ACOTAR series, so I don't mind reading a pointless novella about them because I just love the characters so much. It was quick, it was easy, it had the characters that I know and love. I really enjoyed this, a lot more than most people did, but I think it's not going to contribute towards the storyline of the main books, so you could skip this one and it won't have an impact on the rest of the ACOTAR series. But I just really enjoyed it. It was light and fluffy, cozy, wintry. And our spring and summer here is basically like winter anyway. Next up, in number 12 spot, we have Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. So this is the historical lore behind the Targaryen family line of rulers. It's a big old book. Now, if you've seen my ranking Song of Ice and Fire book videos, I'm pretty sure I rated this after Feast for Crows. Now, between the two, I keep changing my mind as to which one I prefer. Some days I think I prefer Fire and Blood. Some days I think I prefer Feast for Crows. I just can't make it up. So take this spot with a pinch of salt, because if I redid this video tomorrow, I might be talking about Feast for Crows now, and Fire and Blood would have been earlier. This was so interesting. I would say the first 500 pages, I ate it up. Like, I was so invested. I was so excited to read the book. I just was so into it. And then the last part really dragged for me and I just fell out of touch with it. I think it was way longer than it needed to be. I think when there were parts where it would come to a nice ending, George R.R. Martin just felt like he needed to continue it on and on and on. This history is not finished. Apparently, there's a second version of this coming out that will continue the ruler's history, but I will believe that when I see it. It was just long and it is like a historical account. So although it's a fiction, it reads like a non-fiction. It does read like a textbook of sorts, but there were some humour elements added in there, particularly when Mushroom is talking about his account and his perspectives. There's a little bit of wittiness and a little bit of humour sprinkled in there. And it's just ultimately very, very interesting. So if you're interested in the historic lore behind the Targaryen family history, I would recommend it, but it was a little bit of a slog to get through at the end of it. Next up at spot number 11, we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. I've read this book maybe 3 or 4 times, I'm unsure, I've lost track. Similar to Frankenstein, I do tend to read this book every October. It is a perfect Halloween seasonal book. I love this book so much. Dracula has such a huge place in my heart. I don't know why I love this book so much. I just think it's so interesting and it's just so creepy. It's a classic. Not really going to say too much more about that. Very deserving spot in this list, I think. Oh, we're getting close to the end. We're in the final 10. So we're in the top 10 of my 2024 books. This one, I don't know if it's cheating because this is technically part of a book, but for me, it's longer than most books I read, so I'm classing this as one book. So in at spot number 10, we have A Dance with Dragons Part 2, After the Feast by George R.R. Martin. So this is A Dance with Dragons, but the versions that I have are split into 2 parts, but this part is huge. This is the final book that we have so far in the series. Who knows if it will always remain that way. I am losing hope that we'll get another one. I'm going to say it here, I don't think Winds of Winter is coming out anytime soon, at least. This book, however, is just great. I really, really enjoyed it. It starts to conclude some people's storylines. There's a cliffhanger at the end of it, which is really annoying because this book was released ages ago and the next one hasn't been released yet. I can't really say too much more about it without completely spoiling the storyline for anybody who hasn't read it, but I think that this has a lot of plot progression in it, which I do like. It wasn't as boring as I found Feast for Crows to be. I'm sorry Feast for Crows stans, I'm really sorry. In at spot number 9, we have A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J Maas. So this is the 3rd book in the ACOTAR series, quite a big book. The amount of stuff and action that happens in this book is mind-blowing. There is tension and conflict in every single chapter. It's just so deep. There is just so much that happens. I really want to see this be made into a TV show or a movie, and I hope that they do it justice because I can't even fathom how much happens in this book. It's an absolutely brilliant book and I just couldn't recommend it more. If you're into romantasy though, that's the only thing. So I mentioned earlier that Throne of Glass is much more fantasy rather than romantasy. ACOTAR is definitely romantasy. So if you're not into that, you won't like ACOTAR. But I do like that. I love a good mix of fantasy and romantasy. I love both of those kind of subgenres. Just love it. I really loved it. On to number 8, I read this book really recently. This is The Shining by Stephen King. So this was the second Stephen King book that I read not long after Salem's Lot. I loved this book. This deserves all the hype that it gets. I have not watched the movie yet. I really want to, so I am going to do that soon. But this book was just incredible. It had very likeable characters. It had really creepy vibes. If you don't know the premise of this, it's basically about a man and his wife and young son who go to stay at a hotel during its off season. He's going to be the caretaker and they're just living in the hotel over the winter. But the hotel is creepy AF. There's lots of kind of paranormal stuff going on, and the little boy, who is 5 years old, he has some like supernatural abilities as well, which just complicate things to say the least. I said in my review on my channel that I did for this book that the ending was perfect for me. Like, I could not have thought of a better ending for this book, and it was so fulfilling and satisfying to read. I'd highly recommend this. It was so good. In at number 7, again, I don't have this book with me because I did lend this to somebody, but this is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I've officially started my Robin Hobb journey, and boy was it emotional. This book, I talked about it in my review that I did on my channel of this book, but it was just so crazy. And you know what? I think so far Fitz is one of the most likable characters that I've ever read about. I feel so connected to him, and he has such a terrible life, which is why it's so emotional to read this book. And I've literally only just started my journey with Robin Hobb. She's got so many books, and Assassin's Apprentice was actually very small in comparison to some of her other books. But I am going to read the next one. I'm so excited. I will review it on my channel. This is book 1 in the Farseer trilogy. It was absolutely incredible. I loved it. In at number 6 place, we have Eragon by Christopher Paolini. Again, I started the Inheritance Cycle series. I loved this book so much. I was so close to rating it a 5 stars. Again, I think that's a controversial opinion. For a lot of people, this isn't a 5-star book, but you do have to think about when it was written, because it was written quite a while ago, and the age of the author when he wrote this. He was very young, and I just think that this is brilliant. I love the author's writing style so much. Again, similar to Fitz, Eragon is one of the most likable characters that I've ever read about. His companionship to Seraphina, you know what she called? Saphira? I keep getting her name mixed up, but they just have the best partnership ever. It was such a wholesome book. It gave me like a warm fuzzy feeling inside. There was so much action in there, and I suppose the only thing that made me not rate it a 5-star was just because at the end I was a little bit confused with some of the plots, but I'm hoping that that will be built upon in the next one, which is on my January TBR. Loved it. So happy I've read this book. Ugh, this has just been such a good reading year. I've honestly had the best time reading these books. Oh my goodness, we're into the top 5. In at 5th spot, this is a 5-star book. In fact, actually, all the books in my top 5 I rated 5 stars, which I don't do very often. I mean, I read, 35 books in 2024, and only 5 of them got a 5 stars. This book, I had the best time reading it, and this is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This is the current final one in the ACOTAR series. It's quite a big book. This is not told from Feyre's perspective, so prior to this point, the entire series is told through Feyre's perspective. This one is told from the perspective of her sister Nesta. Now, a lot of people are apprehensive to read this book because Nesta is not a likeable character. She's cruel, she's evil, she's moody, she is not nice. But the reason why this is a 5-star book for me is because of the character development. I'm not going to spoil anything, but the fact that I said earlier I don't like reading books from an unlikable character, and Nesta I hated prior to reading this book. But reading things from her perspective and getting to know more about her internal monologues and the growth and progression for that character in this book, it was just incredible. And I think that the romance side was very, very well paced. There's also a lot of tension, a lot of conflict. There are some really deep themes going on in here, and it was such a positive end to the ACOTAR series so far. In at 4th spot, we have such an incredible book. Again, kind of cheating because this is part 1 of A Dance with Dragons, Dreams and Dust by George R.R. Martin. I loved this book so much. This is a 5-star read for me. I think that it progressed the plot of characters really well that weren't in Feast for Crows. And I think because I've been missing a lot of these characters, so when I was reading Feast for Crows, I wanted to read about Jon Snow again. I wanted to see what these characters were up to and what they were doing. And this book, and like, it has so many of my favourite characters in it. It is a top tier book. This is legendary. And I just really like the juicy stuff that goes down in this. And I'm really glad that I read this in 2024, and I finished the whole A Song of Ice and Fire series in 2024. I didn't start it in 2024, so it did take me a little while to read it. But I just loved this so much. In at spot number 3, again, a little bit controversial, but this one, I had an amazing time reading it. I couldn't fault this book at all. I was kind of getting into a little bit of a reading slump prior to reading this book, and this took me out of it. It's very much so deserving of a third place, like top 3. It was a 5-star read for me. I read this very, very recently. I think I read it in November. This is Bewitched by Lucy Jane Wood. Considering this is her first novel, again, the writing style is just brilliant. It's so beautiful. I look at this and think of like a female version of Harry Potter. So it is about a witch who is about to turn 30, and when you turn 30, the coven makes you do some trials to ensure that you are worthy of keeping your magic, because there is a limited supply of magic. So they're not going to let people keep it who aren't utilising it for the greater good. There were plot twists in this book that I was not expecting. It's also a great one to read in the autumn because it's set in the autumn and it has some lovely kind of cosy autumnal vibes in there. The main character, Belladonna, she's very, very likeable. And I'm really chuffed that there's another book coming out soon for this. I think it's coming out next September, so I may read it in 2025. I also have the beautiful Waterstones edition with the sprayed edges. I just couldn't fault this. We are on to book number 2, my second favourite book of 2024. This is Crown of Midnight by Sarah J Maas. This was incredible. So this is technically the second book in the series, but I read it third because I read the prequel first. The stuff that happens in this book is mind-blowing. The plot progression is crazy. The world building is incredible. The plot twists. There were plot twists that happened about halfway through this book that actually made me gasp, and I could not believe it. I was in shock with a lot of the stuff that happened in this book, and this is such a strong book. I really enjoyed it. Honestly, like, this is the strongest book by Sarah J Maas that I've read. It was incredible. I couldn't fault it. As soon as I finished it, I knew immediately it was a 5-star read. And the ending of this, the cliffhanger in this, like, I don't know how I have managed to not pick up the next book. It is on my January TBR. I don't know how I've refrained myself from picking up the next book immediately, because the cliffhanger at the end of this is crazy. And then we're on to my number 1 spot, my favourite book that I read in 2024. Can you guess what it is? If you've stuck around here for a little while, you might be able to guess what it is. This is a legendary book. This is better than the rest in this video by far, in my opinion. This is in a league of its own. This is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. This is a collection of the Dunk and Egg novellas. So this is a prequel to the A Song of Ice and Fire book series. You have your 2 main characters, Dunk and Egg. The perfect duo, the perfect partnership ever. This writing style by George R.R. Martin is so different to the ones in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's not as serious, it's a bit more light-hearted, it's a bit more funny, but I just loved everything about it. Like, I want more adventures from Dunk and Egg. I want to learn more about them. I want to see more adventures that they go on. You've got 3 novellas in this, and they're just going around doing different things, really. And even if they're not doing that much, they're both just so entertaining. Like, I love the banter between them both. There is a TV show being released next year, I'm pretty sure, for this. I really hope that it does it justice, because this book is, do you know what? It probably is one of my favourite books ever. It might be my favourite book ever. This has dominated 2024 for me. I will react to the TV show because I have very high expectations. I am just so happy to be talking about this, and I'm so happy I read it. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. And actually, again, it was a YouTube comment that recommended I read it. Thank you so much to the person who recommended this, because I owe you, like, a lot. A lot of my happiness is down to you. Those are my top books of 2024. Let's move on to a few that I didn't enjoy and that I wouldn't recommend. There's only 4, and then I'll let you go on with your day. First up, we have The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. I no longer have this book because I donated it to my library when I finished it. I just didn't enjoy it. I normally am really, really interested in World War II and the events that happened, and it's crazy to think about. The fact that this book is a true story is brilliant. It was so emotional, and it was just amazing to see the amount of research that had gone into it. The reason why I didn't enjoy it that much was because I just can't get on with the author's writing style. I think if you took the plot, if you took the story, I mean, it's not even a story, it's a real event that happened. I think if you took that and had a different author write it, I would have loved it. It lacked for me, it fell flat, it just wasn't for me. I didn't like Heather Morris's writing style, I'm sorry. Next up we have Let's Meet on Platform 8 by Carol Matthews. Again, I don't have this book because I got rid of it immediately. I didn't want this book in my household after reading it. This was definitely my least favourite book of the year. It was awful, I'm sorry. I've read Carol Matthews books before and I quite enjoyed them. I'm not sure what she was on when she was writing this book. It was not good at all. I would not recommend it to anybody. I do kind of feel like I wasted time reading it. It was not written well. There were so many plot errors. It was hard to read because it was so unenjoyable. The characters were just pursuing infidelity the whole time, and I felt like the author was an advocate for that. She kept making the characters do awful things and then justifying it as though I was supposed to be rooting for them. It was just awful, and I will not recommend that to anybody, and I'm glad I got rid of it. Next up, I did mention this book earlier. This is The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. So this is the second one in the Dream Harbour series after Pumpkin Spice Cafe. Did not like this at all. The whole book was just spice. There was no plot. Again, the main character was unenjoyable to read from. I did not like her. She was really annoying. She kept doing really annoying, stupid stuff. But sometimes if the character's personality is fine, you can get over it. I couldn't get over it with this because she doesn't have a good personality. There was no plot. It was just not good for me. I didn't like it. I would go as far as to say I hated it. Yeah. But I have since read the third one, which is The Christmas Tree Farm, and I really, really enjoyed that. And naturally that one probably would have been spot 25 out of all of these books. I enjoyed The Christmas Tree Farm. This book, I will not read it again. I did not like it. And then the final book that I did not like and would not recommend to anybody is The Christmas Bookshop by Jenny Colgan. I literally finished this about 2 weeks ago. Wasn't for me. It was not a good book. Again, nothing really happened. The main character wasn't likeable. I didn't vibe with the love interest. It just felt not great. It wasn't a great book. And the writing style was very basic. So yeah, there we go. So those are all the books that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go get a glass of water because I've talked for a while. Please let me know some of your favourite books of 2024 and maybe some of your least favourites as well in the comments below. I'd love to see what you've been reading. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up to let me know that you did. And if you like my content and you want to see more from me, then please subscribe because it means that you can see my videos a lot easier and it's free. I will see you next time, or rather you'll see me. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and I'm really excited to see what books we read in 2025. See you later.